Today for our daily cancellation, we turn to the actress Kerry Washington, who has published an excerpt from her upcoming memoir in Time magazine. And as you've noticed, the bar for memoirs has been severely lowered in recent years. It used to be that there were two basic requirements for writing a memoir. First, you have to have led an incredibly interesting life to write a memoir. And second, you have to be a great writer. Memoirs are things that exist for fascinating writers who've lived fascinating lives. And there are very few people who fall into either category and fewer still who fall into both categories. That's the point. It's a very rare person who is worthy of a memoir. But that's all changed. And in fact, it's been flipped completely on its head. And now in most cases, memoirs are written only by the worst writers who have lived the most boring lives. They're written by someone like Kerry Washington, a run-of-the-mill actress who starred in a bunch of mediocre network TV shows. How can she justify a memoir? What can she possibly have to say about her life that's worthy of a memoir? What important experiences has she had? Well, in her Time magazine piece, she tells us about one. She had an abortion. So she may not have done anything interesting or incredibly instructive with her life or constructive, but she did kill her baby. And that story really needs to be told, she thinks. So reading out, it says, in my late 20s, I made the difficult and very private decision to have an abortion. About a decade later, I played a character that was the first woman to be shown undergoing an abortion procedure on network television. As women, it is our right to choose what happens to our bodies, our lives, and our futures. It's also up to us to decide when, how, and with whom we share our stories. The reality is that abortion is a very real and normal part of women's lives. I share the story of my abortion procedure here because our right to make choices about our bodies and our lives is under attack both culturally and legislatively. This is my story. I am one of many, and we will not be silenced. Now, one thing you notice about liberal women is that they never shut up, but they're always claiming that they're being silenced, especially when it comes to their abortion stories. Every time a woman like this comes out with the saga of her abortion, she always has this elaborate, melodramatic wind-up where she insists that it's finally time. It's finally time for women to talk about their abortions. Except that women have been talking about their abortions for decades, okay? We've heard this story over and over and over again. In fact, before we read any more of Kerry Washington's personal and private abortion story, we already know everything it will say because it's always the same script. And that's because evil is not very innovative. It tends to repeat itself, right? It's the banality of evil, which is why every woman who has ever bragged about killing her child has sounded exactly like every other woman who has bragged about killing her child. So we don't need to keep reading, but we will. Continuing, it was January in New York City. I'll never forget how cold it was that morning. I was grateful for the need of additional layers, not only to keep me warm, but also to hide and cocoon myself away from the reality of the procedure I was about to undergo. Let's stop there for a moment. Kerry, you say you wanted to hide from the reality of the procedure you were about to undergo. Why? Why would you need to hide from the reality of the procedure? If abortion is a legitimate medical procedure, and if it's not, in fact, the murder of a human child, then why do you need to hide from its reality? You know, if I were to ever write a memoir about my experience getting surgery on my torn Achilles in 2019, which would at least be as interesting as your memoir, I would never say that I wanted to hide from the reality of the procedure. Okay, I would never open it like that with it was cold outside, it was dark. Cocooned myself from the reality of my Achilles procedure. I would never say that. Now, I may have gotten a little nervous about getting surgery in general, but there was nothing about the reality of the procedure that I found upsetting or distressing. The reality is that they were going to fix something that was broken. It's a good thing. I was happy they were doing it, ultimately. You were not happy. You were hiding from the reality. Why? What is it about abortion that made you want to hide? If you actually were to explore that question in an honest and introspective way, then your abortion story might have a chance to be the first of its kind to have any value whatsoever. But of course, you don't explore that question. You say, I wanted to hide from the reality, never explaining why. What is it about the reality that you want to hide from? What's so upsetting about it? Never explaining, you skip right over it, and we move on to this. Continuing, I sat in the waiting room and completed the paperwork with false information, a made-up name, a pretend address, a non-existent email. Only the phone number was my own, should the office need to reach me in case of an emergency. Let me stop there again. In what other context can you go in for a surgical procedure and get away with providing completely false information? They never asked for your ID. They never verified anything about your identity. They never even verified your age. So we're constantly told about the invisible hurdles that women have to jump over to obtain abortions, but this makes it clear that the hurdles are significantly lower than they are for any actually legitimate medical procedure. Moving on, it says, when the nurse called my false name, I followed her into a small office. She proceeded to ask me questions that she was required to ask by the state to help me make sure that this was the right choice for me and my family, quote unquote. My body felt hot with shame. As a teen, I'd performed with a health education theater company, and I'd spent years on the other side of a version of that conversation, asking young people to consider their options and weigh the consequences. I was schooled and schooled others in the ways of prevention and the language of sexual empowerment. But in my own life, I had committed the crime that seemed unimaginable to me back then. I had let the heat of the moment dictate choices that would impact me for a lifetime. Why hadn't I protected myself? Why hadn't I the courage to create boundaries around my womb? Why had I silenced the preferences my preferences in the name of people pleasing? This all could have been avoided. If I had spoken up for myself in that moment, I wouldn't have found myself in that office. But there I was, surrendering my insides to a surgical vacuum, trying to repair the damage born of my silence and need to be loved. A few points here. First of all, for anyone listening to this, you may have experienced challenges in your life. You may have suffered in many ways. But look on the bright side. At least you were never subjected to performances by Kerry Washington's health education theater company. So however bad you think it may be in your life, it could be worse. There are people, apparently, years ago, who were sitting in audiences watching a health education theater company starring Kerry Washington. Second, notice the passive tone that Kerry adopts here. She chose to have sex outside of marriage at a time when she felt she was unprepared to have children, and it led to predictable results. In fact, her sexual experience had the same result that literally billions and billions of other sexual experiences have had. A man and a woman had sex and they made a baby. It is a story as old as humanity itself. It has played out tens of billions of times across the world and through history. Yet Kerry Washington presents herself as perplexed. I had sex with a man, I became pregnant. How could this have happened? How could this have happened? Well, I could tell you how it happened. I mean, you're the one who was in a health education theater company. I think you should probably know. But it's not really her fault, she informs us. She was just people-pleasing by having sex with the guy. She did it for his sake, really. Her only mistake was not establishing boundaries, which is a not so subtle way of essentially putting all the blame on the man, because she only had sex for his sake. This was about pleasing him. He was crossing boundaries. The sex was something that was happening to her. And if she's to blame for anything, it's for not speaking up for herself. Right. Reading a little more, she says, later as I lay on the medical bed with my feet in stirrups, the doctor described her plans for the termination, the instrument she would be using, and what it might feel like at different stages along the way. I had been to several gynecological appointments through the years, but never one so transactional. Today I'd come to this office for a particular result and required a definitive outcome. When I left, I would be a changed woman without the burden of new life, but perhaps with a bit more time to understand and define my own. As the doctor opened my cervix and inserted the thin vacuum tube, the nurse looked down at me, smiled, and very gently said, "Do you know who you look like?" I think she was trying to comfort me, to tell me that even though this moment was incredibly difficult, she could see the beauty in me, could see that I reminded her of a movie star. She said my real name. I could hear it under the muffled sound of the water in which I was drowning. Kerry Washington. It was my name, but the version she was calling out had nothing to do with me. And so in that moment, I didn't know who I was. Okay. We probably read enough at this point. Two other quick points, though. First, as predicted, the writing here is just absolutely atrocious. I could hear it under the muffled sound of the water in which I was drowning. Never mind that, again, abortion is supposedly a legitimate and positive medical procedure, and yet she compares it to drowning. Okay, you would never describe any other medical procedure that way. But that aside, this is just tremendously awful writing. She is laboring to make the whole experience sound profound and poetic and beautiful, but she finds herself hamstrung by the fact that she is a shallow midwit actress who has never had a profound thought in her entire life. And the result is a sentence like, I could hear it under the muffled sound of the water in which I was drowning, which is equal parts clunky and cliched. It sounds like something you'd read in a 10th grader's creative writing assignment. And by the way, this is a pet peeve, but okay, you can actually end a sentence with a preposition. Nobody in real life would ever say the phrase, the water in which I was drowning. You didn't rescue me from the water in which I was drowning. You would just say, the water I was drowning in. That's what you would say. Now, your public school teacher told you that there's some ironclad grammar rule forbidding you from ever ending a sentence with a preposition, but that was just one of the many things your public school teacher lied to you about, okay? You could end a sentence with a preposition. If you see someone with earbuds in, you don't have to ask them, to what music are you listening? What are you listening to? You don't have to speak like Yoda, okay? That's not the correct grammar. That's incorrect grammar. Well, it's fall, which means cozy nights in with my family. Thanks to my friends at Tommy John, my loungewear for a night in has the perfect blend of comfort and breathability. Their loungewear has a level of softness like I've never felt before. Their incredibly soft loungewear is designed to envelop you in a world of pure luxury. When you wear Tommy John, you're so much more comfortable than that you can do everything better. Even their underwear has dozens of comfort innovations like breathable, lightweight, moisture-wicking fabric with 4 times the stretch of competing brands that can keep you 7 degrees cooler than cotton. Every purchase is backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear or its free guarantee. You get 20% off your first order right now at TommyJohn.com/Walsh. That's 20% off at TommyJohn.com/Walsh. See site for details. It's no secret that we are all loving the Genucel Dark Spot Corrector here. It's making everyone around me have faces I can stand to look at, just barely. You might be asking, what does this product even do? Well, if you have sunspots, dark spot, discoloration, dry skin, whatever it is, the Genucel Dark Spot Corrector will help these blemishes disappear in front of your very eyes. Kimberly from Youngstown, Ohio, I was just talking to her and she said, my appearance has improved so much since using Genucel on my face. I love all my Genucel products and my skin looks younger. Now, it's your turn to feel like Kimberly, but this sale is ending very soon, so you got to take advantage now of Genucel's most popular package, which includes the Dark Spot Corrector. This package also includes the classic Genucel bags and puffiness treatment for immediate effects. You'll get all those products for almost 70% off. Genucel is so confident in their products that you can try them for yourself completely risk-free. If you don't see results in one day, you'll get your money back. It's simple. Go to Genucel.com/Walsh and start looking years, even decades younger. Say hello to the best skin you've ever had at Genucel.com/Walsh. That's Genucel.com/Walsh. More importantly, we have this sentence, which she says, when I left, I'd be a changed woman without the burden of new life, but perhaps with a bit more time to understand and define my own. And that's the whole story right there. I mean, that's the part that really matters. Because this is what abortion is in the vast majority of instances. Kerry Washington was not a poor, desperate woman getting an abortion because she felt she had no choice. Now, it still would not have been justified even in that case, but that is not the case here. She simply just didn't want to deal with a baby. She didn't feel like having a baby, so she's killing it. She even acknowledges that the life in her womb is in fact life, but it's a life that burdens her, inconveniences her, interferes with her lifestyle. Is she killing her child so that she doesn't end up homeless or starve to death? Which still would not be a justified reason for killing your child, because nothing could ever justify killing a child. Nothing. But no, that's not even why she's doing it. In her words, she just wants to have more time to understand and define her own life. So she is willfully and admittedly destroying human life for the most frivolous reason imaginable. She's killing her own child, and all that she can offer to defend that decision is some meaningless self-actualization jargon. In other words, she is simply a terrible human being. That's the real moral of the story. It's the one thing we learn from her otherwise pointless and dull memoir. And it's why Kerry Washington is today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.